We'll now get on to the first panel discussion. And if you have read your agenda, you'll know that we're going to be discussing why net zero matters. Almost the question that doesn't need to be asked, but we're going to ask it anyway, and the role of the plant hire sector in driving that change. So may I ask you to give a very warm welcome, first of all to Fergus Harradence, the Deputy Director of Construction at the Department of Business. Step that way. And our next guest is Tom Thackray, Director of Infrastructure at the CPA. David Emery, some of you I'm sure will know, the a consultant with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. Although David's a very good friend of this industry, you're also quite a trenchant critic, David, so I'm looking forward to some of the things that you have to say. Dr. Carl Desouza is a research associate at Imperial College, and I have to tell you that he's just finished his PhD, or a PhD, on emissions from the construction industry. I'm sure we'll be asking you about some of your research and your findings, Carl. And finally, again, probably known to many of you, Paul Mabey from JCB. Where are you, Paul? There you are. If there were fewer of you, I'd be sitting down with you. I hope you won't be offended if I stand up owing to the shortage of microphones. Very, very warm welcome to all of you. Paul, I'd like to start with you, actually, if I might, and just ask you, for those of you who don't know you, very briefly to introduce yourself, and then I'll go along the line.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Paul Mabey from JCB, part of the national account team looking after the larger rental houses in the UK, JCB's biggest customers, and just assumed responsibility for the rollout of the electric products in the UK.
Right, so you're going to have plenty to say over the next few minutes. Dr. Desouza, or do you prefer Carl?
Carl's fine.
Carl.
Morning, everybody. Carl Desouza, Imperial College London. I'm working at the Centre for Low Emission Construction, and we're looking at different types of ways to decarbonize as well as on the road to net zero with different construction projects.
Thank you very much. David?
Yeah, morning, everyone. Dave Emery from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. The school is a huge repository of learning materials and training opportunities funded by our 139 partners and largely free at the point of use for most of the supply chain. My background is in architecture. My particular interest is in digital and BIM, about which I've been speaking for the best part of 20 years. And yes, Merryn, I am something of a critic of our industry, but nevertheless, industry that I really love.
Thank you very much indeed. And Tom?
Hi everyone, yeah, Tom Thackray. I'm the Programme Director for Decarbonisation at the CPA, which is the Confederation of British Industry. We're the UK's largest business representative organisation, so we represent small, medium and large businesses across all sectors of the economy. And my role, there's two parts of it really. The first half is really a government-facing role in which there'll be people like Fergus on a day-to-day basis to try and create the conditions in which businesses can invest in new initiatives related to decarbonisation, and the second half is more of a practical role in terms of helping our businesses within our membership take steps towards greater sustainability.
Thank you. And Fergus, I'm guessing that you will be bringing a government perspective to our discussions.
Hopefully, yes. Yeah, I'm Fergus Harradence. My responsibility is to sponsor the whole of the construction industry for government. So I cover everything from the largest end of the industry working on HS2 right the way through to individual tradesmen going and doing work in people's homes, the product manufacturing industry, plant hire industry, and the professional services aspect of the industry as well.
And presumably you have the task of dealing with our politicians from time to time.
Yes, yeah.
Right, that was short and sweet, wasn't it? Don't forget that you can ask questions either by putting up your hand or by accessing Slido. I should have said at the beginning, by the way, do please feel free to turn off the, not to turn off your mobile phones, but to turn the volume down so we don't get disturbed. And yes, I have done exactly the same. Gentlemen, really, really looking forward to this. I posed the question a few moments ago about why does net zero matter? And in global terms, as I said, that's really the question that almost doesn't need posing. But perhaps in terms of this industry, maybe it does. Paul, I'd like to start with you. Why does net zero matter to this industry? And, you know, you're very much at the sharp end.
First question, well. I think it's very well documented why it matters. I think it's key to all of us moving forward. I think some of our, particularly JCB customers and our customers' very, very high on their agenda. We see the targets that have been set by government and individual businesses, and we're doing all we can to assist in that.
You said just then that you were driven by customers, but I'd just like to ask you about that, because it's also an industry that's very much driven by price. Do those two conflict?
They do, yeah, and for us as an OEM manufacturer, we have to create that commercially viable product, the product to do the job, but also be commercially viable for our customers and our customers' customers. So yeah, it can be a very delicate balancing act.
So how much do you see this as a global planetary matter of importance, and how much is it a commercial imperative?
Obviously,
it's a tough one.
First and foremost, it is of global importance to each and every one of us here. I think Chris said in his introduction about what we've seen in the environment and what we've seen happen over the recent years with floods and fires. We know how important it is. Wow. Commercially, yes, it's important for us to build the right machine, to ensure that we've got the right product out in the market to assist in driving net zero forward. For us at the present time, we're doing all we can, working with our partners, big education piece with the industry on if you want electric plant, if you want the stage 5 engines, you know, JCB are at the forefront of that technology.
That's really interesting. I'm sure the tension between what we've just been discussing will actually come up many times during the day, but just for the time being, thank you. You mentioned government figures, which seems a very good moment to turn to you, Fergus. What exactly are those targets as they relate to this industry?
Well, the targets that we've set in statute are to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. But actually, the more proximate and important targets from the perspective of the industry are to achieve a 68% reduction in carbon emissions on the 1990 baseline by 2030 and a 78% reduction on carbon emissions compared to the baseline by 2035, which clearly poses an enormous challenge to an industry that does account for a significant amount of UK carbon emissions. So if you look at the built environment sector overall, about 30% of all UK carbon emissions originate from that. And that's primarily the energy that's consumed in buildings being heated, domestic uses, power that's used in devices, computer networks and things like that used in offices. But still, around about 10% of the built environment's contribution comes from the construction industry, product manufacturing, plant operation, vehicle movement and logistics.
Just between ourselves, do you think, particularly relating to this industry, do you think those targets are achievable and realistic? Don't worry, it won't go any further.
Well, I mean, bear in mind, these are national level targets, and clearly some sectors are going to move forward more quickly than others. In relation to the construction industry and its own emissions, I think those targets are very stretching, particularly the 2030 target. I think the 2035 target is potentially more achievable. Nationally, yes, I think the 68% carbon emissions reduction by 2030 is possible, provided we continue to make progress in things like the decarbonisation of energy generation supply.
And are you broadly encouraged by what you see around you?
Yes, I mean, we launched the Construct Zero initiative this year. It's not something that has been an initiative that the Construction Leadership Council and the government have had around for some time. Clearly, we have worked on sustainability and decarbonisation. It was one of the things of the Transforming Construction Challenge. But Construct Zero was a specific initiative that we launched this year to do two things: to capitalise on the COP26 conference and generate a sense of momentum within the industry about that, and get the industry thinking about the contribution it could make to climate change targets, and then in the longer term to build a movement of change within the industry. And the response that we've had to Construct Zero has been phenomenal. And firms from across the industry, large contractors, large consultants, product manufacturers, SMEs, everybody is starting to take an interest in this and starting to look at what they can do to reduce their carbon emissions.
Can you give us an example, illustration of this phenomenal response? Without naming names,
at the larger
obviously.
end of the industry, we've got big product manufacturers like Saint-Gobain looking at how they can decarbonise their emissions and how their capital investment strategy can modernise their plant and make it a lot more efficient. You've got other mineral products producers looking at how they can extract minerals and produce products like cement in a carbon efficient way. You've got product manufacturers like JCB developing hydrogen excavators, which I've seen in operation. They're a fantastic product. And then actually you've got some little SMEs and design consultancies. One that I'd highlight, it's a brilliant idea. It's a firm that's actually looking at how it can mitigate carbon emissions and improve air quality from homes by actually having living walls and incorporating these within the buildings.
Let me just, for all of you really, I'm not certain who wants to answer this, so you can all dive in if you want. But as somebody external to the industry and as someone who, like all of us, is the recipient of constant pressure and encouragement to decarbonise our own individual lives and our businesses, what does net zero actually mean? Does it refer to operating at net zero, or how far back upstream does it go? And I'll give you an example of what I mean. I was listening to More or Less on Radio 4 the other day, and they were discussing whether you should be using your dishwasher or washing your dishes by hand. And they decided that actually a dishwasher was more environmentally friendly until you took into account the manufacture of the dishwasher, the transportation to get the materials to the dishwasher. I'm glad you're all nodding. Who would like to tell me how far upstream this concept of net zero actually goes?
I would just say that's for everyone. So within that supply chain that you described, your dishwasher manufacturer needs to be a net zero company and needs to be sourcing its components in a net zero way, needs to be using the most up-to-date sustainable materials. The individual has a responsibility to sort of, I guess, to check its own carbon footprint and to source things which are sort of conducive with everyone playing its role. So all of the businesses along that supply chain need to be net zero businesses, which means dealing with their own emissions, called Scope 1 and 2, and then Scope 3 emissions, which are those sort of in the broader supply chain and in the use of the products that they make as well. So once you have that sort of groundswell of that movement of businesses all moving towards net zero, almost the problem for that consumer is solved for itself, because all parts of that supply chain that you describe are moving that way.
So what does that mean for people like our guest today who are running their own construction and plant hire businesses?
Everyone's got a role to play, I'd say. So, you know, the implication of net zero is that it's for all businesses. I think when we were reducing, you know, the former targets were to reduce emissions by 80%. And I think everyone had the tendency to think, oh, I might be in that 20% that doesn't need to do anything. But net zero, the implication is that it's for everyone. So, you know, whether you're the largest FTSE 100 company or a small one-man band, I think you need to understand what you can do. And some things are very simple. It's just about, you know, understanding what your carbon footprints, start measuring, start planning, and then start reporting. There's very clear things that you can do to become a more sustainable business.
I think on the panel I'd probably represent the dishwasher manufacturer. So that for us in our supply chain is understanding where the steel, the components, everything that goes into making the JCB machine. I'm smiling because it took less than 7 minutes for someone to mention the JCB hydrogen digger. So everything that goes into the machine for us has to be managed upstream in our supply chain, and then we manage our supply chain upstream.
But that is a huge amount of work even for a big company. For some smaller companies, is it really realistic? Do any of you concerned that you would be so busy working on this that you wouldn't actually be manufacturing or running your businesses? A few nodding heads. Any thoughts, Paul?
It's then ensuring that our machines and other manufacturers' machines are as close to net zero as they can be. so then the machines that then go out into the world to work can be managed accordingly with the rollout of what they're doing in their day-to-day applications.
Carl, your PhD, which you told me a tiny bit about when we spoke on the phone before the conference. I'm longing to ask you more about it. It's a very general question, I know, but what have you discovered about emissions, and are you able to relate it particularly to this industry?
Yes, in the PhD and during the PhD, basically what I did was we see once dishwasher is delivered to your home, for example, does it do what it's doing or it's supposed to have done as stated by the manufacturer? So this is where the measurement bit is key and is important, because we got to then determine, it's fine to say that the emissions in a test cell are so and so, but in the real world, is it actually what it's supposed to be doing? So that is key, and it's vitally important to know what machines are doing, which can then give us a baseline. For example, if you're just using diesel and everybody wants to move away from diesel, or they should be, what is your baseline emissions? If we then have alternative technologies, for example, hydrogen or electric is bound to be zero at the tailpipe because there is no tailpipe. But is there an actual benefit of using these alternative technologies? So that's where the scientific evidence is key, not only in a test cell or in a lab environment, but in the actual world out there to see if it is what it's supposed to be doing.
So how much field work, as it were, did you do for your PhD?
It was quite a bit of field work. Measured, I think, about 30 different types of machines. Some of them were with JCB, some of them were with other plant as well. And it was quite significant because then this can be put forward to government, for example, GLA, Greater London Authority, to DEFRA. We haven't yet contacted BEIS, but we should be doing. And then this feeds back to all the way upstream to government to say that, look, this is what's out there, so-and-so's potential policy can be implemented, and then this is the way to move forward. So it is quite important.
I know scientists, particularly research scientists, like to work purely from the data, but that's not going to stop me asking you the next question, which is really, is it possible for you to say, to gauge your level of optimism that industry will take up these thoughts, in fact, more than take them up, see them through?
Yes, so the other key then, or the other aspect, is not only to feed back to government policy, but you can also then feed back to the manufacturers themselves and say, this is what we found, it's totally independent, this is what your results were when you tested them. Probably you do not need to do anything else, or probably you do need to look at something else as well. So there is that feedback or the feed-forward loop which keeps happening, and that is how we continuously innovate and develop.
So we're sort of climbing up slowly up the hill of optimism, but I'm just going to bring it to a halt there, and I'm looking at you, David, because you said to me when we spoke that, and I say this because I know you are a friend of this industry, that it is currently the least innovative industry in the UK, were the words that you said to me. How big a handicap is that going to be in this wider discussion of finding net zero?
I think I should preface any remarks I make by saying, actually, I do love this industry, and I think at its best, it's capable of the most amazing achievements. It's delivered some of the most complex projects ever devised by man, usually in an extremely hostile environment. So at its best, it's a wonderful industry. But in my 45 years, 1 month and 1 day in it, it's been characterized for me by a severe lack of efficiency, and some fundamental structural flaws that we've continually failed to address. So for me, it's an industry that's characterized by very, very low margins, by an aversion to risk, by a lack of collaboration, by contractual difficulties, and so on and so on. On the other hand, I think we in this room are indicative of what I sense is a certain appetite for change that I've noticed in the last few years that was particularly absent for the previous 40 years. But nevertheless, we do remain an industry that, in terms of change towards efficiency, has spectacularly failed to deliver. So when I think back over the period of my career since the 70s, I've seen every other sector innovate and modernise and do things in a fundamentally different way. I grew up just a few miles from the Longbridge car factory, which was a beacon for inefficiency and terrible quality. And now the British car industry leads the world. But by any research that we see, this industry is still highly wasteful in terms of its material resources. It's highly wasteful in terms of its time spent reworking and correcting things that have gone wrong. And it's always seemed to me that the companies that could actually see that if we could only drive out inefficiency from our business, we would automatically rise to the top of the pile. If we're wasting 20 to 30% of our material resources, if we could cut that out, what would that do to our profitability? If we could cut out something like the 21% it's estimated of time spent reworking, what would that do to our profitability? So whilst I applaud this sector for looking at ways to innovate and drive down waste in plant hire, I think we have to recognise that what you're doing is you're doing your best in an industry that is still, for me, fundamentally flawed. Sorry to be so critical.
Well, it seems like a good moment to ask you just to recap on what the Sustainability School is and does, because it seems very germane at this moment.
Thank you. So I know that there are partners and members of the school in this room. In essence, it arose from discussions about 9 years ago from 7 Tier 1 construction companies who felt that it would benefit the entire industry if there was a means to upskill the entire supply chain. So a better educated, more skillful supply chain would benefit us all. And from that germ of an idea has grown the school. So we have, I think, virtually all the Tier 1 construction companies, the top 10 house builders and other organisations pay to become partners of the school. In return, we deliver education and training and workshops to their own staff. But also their finance allows us to deliver training materials to the rest of the supply chain. And I think our statistics are that something like 17,000 businesses have tapped into our resources and something like 60,000 individuals have used our resources over those 9 years. And one of the huge benefits is that if you are engaged with our resources, you can receive a personalised learning plan in whatever topic you're interested in, but that gives you a digital badge. And that badge is visible to your potential customers and the Tier 1s higher up in the supply chain. So it's a virtuous circle. Your customers can be reassured of the level of education you've received. I think that's enough for my pitch. Thank you.
Other than to ask you, what do you think you've actually achieved so far?
Oh, well, I think the school achieves an enormous amount. We seem to have developed a sort of philanthropic attitude amongst our partners, which is rare in construction. We seem to have created an environment where our partners are willing to share knowledge and experience and ideas and be open and collaborative with each other. And I think we've achieved a certain way of not only educating the supply chain, but certifying their competence. And I feel that the school has reached a tip-over point where so many people say to us now, our customers and our suppliers have told us we must engage with the school. So I would say this, wouldn't I? But I do think it's become a central focus for the industry for collaboration and education.
So the first half of our conversation was really around why net zero matters. Let's spend a few moments on that second half, the role of the plant hire sector in driving change. And we've got some terrific perspectives from government through to industry, through to academia, through to Paul, the guys on the front line. What is the role of the plant hire sector and or JCB specifically in driving this change?
It's almost combat the previous point. I think as an industry we are.
We're all friends.
Yeah. Maybe I get to see behind the curtain of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory a little bit more than others, and the everlasting gobstoppers we're working on and everything that's going on within our business. That innovation is it's written on the walls. It's key to everything that we do as a business. But that innovation is only driven by the people in the room here, the plant hire industry and their customers, the Tier 1s and the Tier 2s of this world that are driving the hire industry for change. And that reaches us, and we develop and design a machine to do so.
So are you saying that you develop and design and you innovate in response to demand, or is it the other way around?
Well, I'd say in collaboration with both. We listen to the market, we analyse the market, we talk to to all figures around this table as well as the market to understand what's happening. And the kind of what I keep coming back to is we're talking about the future. We're always talking about this 2030, 2035, whereas we've got electric products now. There's a part of the future that's here now, and we need to really start that traction. And part of my role moving forward is going to be understanding from the people in the room and from the tier ones and the tier twos is where are we now? What have we got now? And what can we get into the supply chains of these businesses now? The businesses that we're all aware of the tender process that goes on in construction, that are winning tenders based on their access to sustainable and green plant. And it's about getting that education. We keep coming back to the education piece, on educating the market on what is available now and what is coming.
Yeah. So the break is a marvellous time to buttonhole, Paul, because it's obviously going to be a two-way flow of information.
Very much so, it has to be.
Yeah.
Because without a machine pitch, we've got competitors in the room who think exactly the same as me. We need to educate the industry on electric plant and what you need to have on site from an infrastructure point of view to run this plant, how it's charged, how it's stored, the anxiety about runtime, the anxiety about charge time, those questions that are going to keep coming back day in, day out. If you were to put those, and I'm 22 years deep in plant hire, if you were to put those machines just into a fleet, they would get lost. They're not a standard plant hire sale. That we almost need to change the sales angle with these machines. You need to be talking to different people within your customers' businesses, the sustainability teams, the health and safety teams, away from your normal touch points. And that's going to be key for the industry.
That's a really important message for any of you who do have those teams. Maybe the sales are going in the wrong direction. I was going to move on to Carl, and I promise I will in a moment, Carl, but you just mentioned an interesting word, your competitors. How much does competition, or how much will competition drive this change, if at all? Will it hold it back, in fact? Maybe that's unfair. Maybe it's one for Tom, who knows all about it. Tom's nodding.
Yeah. If Tom's nodding, let Tom answer.
I think it's a bit of a two-edged sword, I'd say, competition. I think in some ways, competition is the driver of innovation, and those who outcompete their rivals on sustainability or on innovation or the new model can sometimes drive market share on the back of it. I think in this sector, there's people who are far more expert on the construction sector than me, but in this sector, I think it's characterized by sometimes a race to the bottom on price, and that's driven by, sometimes by client behaviors, but that permeates through the supply chain. So that competitive element is normally a competition based on price rather than quality. And so how do we measure what people are doing more effectively on the quality side of things, which includes sustainability?
So, Fergus, if it's a race to the bottom in terms of price, and let's be honest, we're all commercial organisations, what can you, as the Department of Business, do to try and mitigate that? Is it worth trying to get people to work more closely together and put aside competition? I have no idea. You tell us.
No, I think it has to change because Tom is right. What we have got into over the last 25 years is a downward spiral where the focus has been exclusively on price and it hasn't focused on quality and whole life performance. And if you want to create a business environment where competition has a positive impact, you need to shift the focus away from simply price and look at other factors as well. So it was really that rationale that inspired us to publish the Construction Playbook last year, which is government's statement of intent when it comes to resetting its relationship with the construction industry and making this a lot more strategic, a lot less transactional, and shifting the focus towards whole life performance, quality, safety, sustainability, and actually trying to create a stronger, more resilient and more profitable industry. And we've supplemented that with things like the social value framework as well, which will require public sector procurers to take account of the level of social value created, which is effectively the economic, social and environmental value that you can gain not only from implementing the project, but from the way in which it's implemented. So what we're looking to do is to reward those companies that consistently invest in things like innovation, new technologies, new techniques, creating social value in terms of skills or environmental improvement, decarbonisation.
In what way reward? Tax breaks?
No,
Grants?
we're looking,
loans?
one of the stated intentions is to place longer term, higher value contracts with firms or consortia firms or alliances that have proven that they have got the capability to deliver better outcomes and social value over the long term.
Just as a by the by, I assume everyone knows about the construction playbook, but if you don't, you can find it on the gov.uk website, can't you?
Yes.
Because I had a look at it the other day. It was slightly confusing because for some reason it was actually next to a child's playbook on construction, which was weird. I think that just must have been my computer, nothing to do with you. Thank you very much, Carl. I did promise I would come to you and come back to the question of the role of the plant hire sector in driving change.
Not only the plant hire sector, but the construction industry as a whole. If you look at all the key sources of pollutants in the UK, obviously at the top is road transport. In terms of carbon, construction industry is at its fourth largest contributor. In terms of air quality, we're talking about NOx and your PMs, particulate matter. There are, I think, I've got it written down, the second largest in terms of particulate matter and the fourth largest in terms of NOx, which is, again, toxic gases and stuff like that. So it is a significant source of air pollution and carbon. And as the largest source, which is road transport, tends to decrease when it moves towards electric, and they've already started innovating on a commercial level, and it's already out there and available, other sources will increase in comparison to this road transport sector. So I think the construction industry is now at a pivotal stage where it needs to, and it already has been, innovating, but it's at this stage, it's at prototypes, and it's electrics and hydrogen, stuff like that. It needs to take a further step, which probably will be driven by the supply or the demand. So the industry is at a pivotal stage where it can either take a huge leap forward or wait for everybody else to then come along, and it's a slower change. So we are there, but not yet quite there yet.
But the role, if there is to be one, is going to be significant in your opinion?
It definitely will be significant because the UK has got a 2050 target for net zero. Yes, it was the first country to pass this through legislation, but why should we wait for 2050 when we can do it right now? As Chris said in his keynote, 3 degrees by the end of the century or 1.5 degree by 2050. That basically means to me is we should be acting yesterday, not wait for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. David, your thoughts on the role of this sector in driving through this change?
Well, I think as a sector, you are very high profile. After all, what's the first thing we think of when we visualize a construction site? It's a site that's full of plant and machinery that you people are making. And I'm sure you're doing your very best to not only find more sustainable ways of fueling these vehicles, but actually to use them more effectively and efficiently. But I come back to the point that your work is to some extent undermined by the structural inefficiencies within the industry. Just to pick up on some of the concepts around frameworks, I facilitated a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and I won't name names, but it was a public sector client had invited 5 suppliers onto a 3-year framework, and the issue was that the procurement teams clearly didn't understand what it is that their suppliers could supply. So in the course of 3 hours, we ran a very amicable workshop where both sides were enlightened and promised to work together much better. And then the very next week, another tender came out from the client to the framework members in which it was purely based on price in an unfeasibly short delivery time. So in other words, the buyers have reverted to type. What I was delighted to hear earlier in networking here is that some of the plant companies are now being invited to engage at a much earlier stage with a client. And I think that collaborative approach of understanding your issues, what you can offer, and how you can best help the client will hopefully in the future take away this, as I think somebody used the phrase, this race to the bottom on price. Profit in our industry really shouldn't be a dirty word. It should be something that we should be reasonable, comfortable with. And if I can just continue, we have a company within the school a new consultancy called Akerlof, and they said it was named after a Mr. Akerlof, who I recently did some research about. And he's an American who looked at the American auto industry, and he could see that the buyers had a range of prices. At the low end were low quality vehicles, and at the high end were high quality vehicles. And buyer choice determined that there was a median price above which most buyers will not go. And the long-term effect of that is that the quality suppliers fall away and the median price drops. So you inevitably have a chase to the bottom where you get low prices, but inevitably low quality. And until we break that mindset in this industry, I fear for its future. But on a more positive note, as I said earlier, I do sense an appetite for change in the last few years that's not been there for the 40 previous years.
Well, sadly, we're beginning to run out of time, and I don't want to hold back any questions that anybody might have from our ongoing discussion. Anyone itching to ask a question? If not, I have got one up my sleeve. Do not fear, but it's over to you guys. This is very much your conference. Or even just any thoughts or comments that you want to share with us from the perspective of your own company or the perspective of the industry generally. Give you a few seconds just to think about it. And if not, oh, sorry. Just hold on a tiny little second till Pete gets to you with the microphone. There we are, thank you.
Paul, we met briefly last night. I'm just sort of interested from a sales perspective. How does selling the EV vehicles stack up against traditional ICE machines? And in particular, I'm sort of thinking about really the overall commercial proposition to the fleet owners and to the rental companies. For example, residual sale value, running costs, because I mean that's got to be your biggest hurdle, I suppose, in terms of actually getting the machines out there into the job sites.
We're not far enough on the journey yet to have an opinion on what the RVs are going to be on the machines in years to come. We're not quite there yet. We are looking at it, but you're right. The electric machines you see around are more expensive and a more premium product than its diesel compatriot, and it has to be sold by us and as the rental houses and the end users as such. It's a niche product. It's got a purpose. It's not a general construction machine as such. It should be used in an environment that's conducive to its use. Yes, there are lower running costs with the electric products. There's less filters. There's less things that can go wrong under the bonnet. The PDI time is dramatically reduced on an electric machine in comparison to a diesel. It's a different sale in its entirety from a diesel machine to an electric machine, and that's, again, we keep coming back to the education piece. For us, it's almost selling this in a different way now. It's top down. It's actually us talking to your customers, to the tier 1s, to the tier 2, to drive the demand to you guys for these machines to get them into their supply chain, and that's the struggle for us at the moment.
Actually, you raise a really interesting point, and I don't think it's a struggle just for JCB. I think it's a struggle for every single one of us on this planet. Is from an outsider's perspective, surely the ultimate answer has got to be that, yes, it costs more. You have to pass on the costs. We all have to bite the bullet. In the end, the customer, the consumer, all of us has to end up paying. And the government is so determined not to tell us this. Tom, you wanted to come in here.
Just a broader point about the cost of technology, and I'd be interested to know about this sector, but we have seen in the energy transition the cost of renewable technology just fall off a cliff in a really short space of time. 5 to 10 years, the cost of producing renewables has fallen dramatically. So, and that's been driven by economies of scale. So the consumers have paid for that transition in our energy bills. We've all been paying for that. But now, the cheapest form of energy that you can buy is renewable energy. And we're likely to see that shift in all kinds of green technologies. And hopefully, and I'd be really interested to know whether the cost profile of some of the green technologies at play in this sector what's it going to take for them to be on a par? So that it's just a rational choice from a cost perspective as well as a quality perspective.
So you think commercially we're in an evolution rather than a...
Exactly, and I think we have to be very careful about presenting this as the expensive choice, because I think what we've seen in other parts of the economy, there is an upfront cost, but it's a hell of a lot less expensive than the impact of climate change if we don't act now. So it's a lot less expensive if we wait for 10 years and then try and decarbonise.
Thank you. That was much more interesting than my question. Thank you very much indeed. Just to wrap up, has anybody else got a question that's capable of a fairly quick answer? Because I'm sure you're all gasping for a cup of coffee. Thank you. Steve.
Okay, Asif Latif, Managing Director of Bulls Rental in the UK. So for me, I accept everything that everybody said up there, and I really agree with the fact that I think there's one more step to decide what kind of technology and energy solutions we want to move forward with. Once we do that, do we think there would be benefit to perhaps lobby the government, to work with the government, to accelerate that change and provide support, not just for the larger rental companies, but for the small one-man bands? If you think back to when we did cars, and then we had a car scrappage scheme, and the government really got behind it, put some money behind it, helped the end user remove that vehicle and get them into a new one. Do you think there's something like that that can be done perhaps for our industry and some of the perhaps older equipment to bring that median down to help us get to that net zero target?
So a sort of scrappage scheme almost.
Exactly
absolutely.
that, yeah.
Fergus, is that one for you?
Yes, it is. Well, I think the first priority is working out what we need to do. So a couple of months ago, we launched a red diesel replacement competition, which is a two-phase competition that we're going to be running over the next couple of years, where the aim is to support businesses to innovate and come up with solutions not only to decarbonising plant itself, but actually to look at how you decarbonise all of the infrastructure that's required to support that plant. And what we're hoping is that over the next couple of years, that will lead to the development of some solutions that we know are commercially viable and can be implemented across the industry. And then I think, yes, we are going to have to create a framework where we start incentivising the transition away from currently red diesel powered plant to electric powered plant, hydrogen powered plant, or plant that relies on some other form of energy generation.
Fergus, thank you very much indeed. And Asif, thank you very much indeed for that question.
Behind and actually include not just the bigger companies, but the smaller companies out there, the one-man bands, and organisations like the CPA would probably be an ideal forum to do that.
Yeah. Thank you all very much indeed for your questions, but mainly a huge round of thanks to our guests who've given up their very, very precious time to come and share their, I think you will agree, extremely interesting thoughts with us. Fergus Harradence, Tom Thackray, David Emery, Carl Desouza, thank you, and of course Paul Mabey. Thank you all very, very much indeed for your contribution.